My dad swirled his Cabernet so slowly the candlelight caught each crimson ripple. He looked over the rim of his glass at me, boots still dusted from the farm, denim dress older than my college transcript, and asked, almost kindly, "You really think you belong here?" I heard the scrape of a fork pause midair. The dining room around us hummed with Saturday night chatter, snow-damp coats draped over chair backs, couples leaning over small plates, a jazz trio slipping brass notes through the brick arches, but at our table time thinned to a hush. That hush carried the scent of hickory and hay, a scent I'd never quite shaken no matter how hard Boston tried to perfume me with sea wind and roasted coffee. It clung to me like truth, and I had no intention of scrubbing it off tonight. Mom was the first to fill the silence. She tapped her phone, pretended to check a message. The diamond on her ring flashed, a tiny lighthouse signaling the shoals of her disapproval. "Claire," she murmured, "they do have a dress code. Next time maybe leave the chore boots in Vermont?" Lauren smiled without showing teeth. "It's kind of rustic chic, Mom. Farmcore is trending." She leaned closer to her fiancé, an investment analyst named Trevor who wore navy like a second skin, and stage whispered, "I read an article, people pay extra for authenticity these days." Authenticity. A word they used like an accent wall, nice in theory, unsettling in every photo. I kept my hands folded in my lap, thumb grazing the uneven seam I'd mended back when money was measured in bags of feed. Let them talk. Let them guess. They believed I was here because Lauren had begged me to at least show up for dinner, Mom worries. They believed I'd finally crawled back to the city, pockets as empty as the resume I'd abandoned. And maybe I would have, 5 years ago, scrambled for their approval like a stray for table scraps. But seasons of mud and sunrise chores have a way of sanding down that kind of hunger. Dad set his glass down. "So," he said, drawing the word out like a business pitch, "still doing the pig thing?" Trevor tried to cough a laugh, then caught Mom's warning glance. The chandelier above us glimmered in his water glass. He studied it as though it held stock tips. "I am," I answered. My voice sounded calm even to me. "The pig thing suits me." Mom's sigh arrived in 3 parts, inhale, pause, exhale, just loud enough to reach the next table. "Sweetheart," she said, "there are internships at Whole Foods corporate that pay decently. You could move back, settle somewhere more comfortable." Translation: somewhere we can explain at cocktail parties. Before I could reply, Lauren grabbed the wine bottle, refreshed Dad's glass, and said, "We'll toast, at least. To family all together." She raised her glass. The word family hung between us like a painting tilted off-center. I lifted my water. The stem was cold, condensation pooling at my thumb. I wondered if the kitchen had begun plating the pork roulade yet, my roulade, the one marbled with winter herbs and slow-rendered fat. Would they taste the hint of juniper I'd added that morning? Would they notice the crackling dusted with sea salt flakes the size of snow? Dad cleared his throat. "Lauren tells us Vermont's been rough this winter. Must be hard keeping the heat on in a trailer." He smiled, generous now that he believed the check would land in his lap. I smiled back. "Cold strengthens the stock. Makes for richer meat." Trevor blinked as if I'd spoken calculus. Lauren pressed her napkin to her mouth, maybe hiding a grin, maybe hiding a grimace. It was always hard to tell with us. A server appeared, sliding charcuterie boards onto the table, ribbons of country ham, pickled mustard seeds, a chutney glistening amber. Dad examined a slice. "Thick cut," he said. "Unrefined plating." "Artisanal," Trevor offered, eager to be useful. "It's delicious," Mom conceded after a cautious bite, surprised by her own enjoyment. I waited. I had waited 5 years, through frozen water lines, through farmers' markets that ended with more groceries than cash, through nights when the only applause was the rustle of pigs settling into straw, to see this exact expression cross her face. Curiosity, pricked by delight, complicated by a pride she couldn't place. Between courses, Lauren scrolled her phone. Reservation system says there's a private tasting room here, maybe we should have booked that. She looked at me. Probably pricey, though. I shrugged. Worth it for the right crowd. Dad chuckled. Crowds with real money. The words slid over the linen like spilled oil. I thought of the ledger in my office, the one Gloria and I reviewed monthly, columns of numbers that grew steadier with every new location, every speaking panel, every partnership. Money no longer felt like lightning in my hand, it felt like soil, dark and stable. A lull settled. Silverware gleamed in low light. Somewhere behind the kitchen doors a bell chimed, a signal I understood instinctively, "Autres up." Moments later the dining room door opened and Marcus stepped out, posture straight as a blade. His tailored vest bore the restaurant's small iron pig emblem, midnight against charcoal. He approached our table with a respectful nod. "Pardon the interruption." His gaze settled on me, warm but professional. "Miss Manning, your usual table is prepared. Shall I bring the investor wine list now or once you're seated?" Silence isn't silent when it shatters. Dad's hand jerked, red wine sloshed against crystal and streaked his cuff. He coughed once, twice, the sound echoing off brick like a misfired toast. Mom's eyes widened, pupils skittering between Marcus and me. Lauren froze, her phone half raised, the screen casting a glow over her stunned face. I kept my voice even. "Thank you, Marcus. This table will do just fine for now." Marcus inclined his head. "Of course, Ms. Manning." He placed a slim leather folder beside my plate, a list of reserve bottles rarely offered without request, then disappeared as smoothly as he'd arrived. Dad dabbed his sleeve, color rising in his cheeks, bewilderment shading into something closer to alarm. The linen napkin trembled between his fingers. And there it was, the precise, fragile instant when the axis of our family began to tilt, when questions flooded the space where certainty used to sit. I watched the ripples spread across their faces, and for the first time all evening felt the room settle comfortably around me, as though it, too, had been waiting for this shift. I used to be Claire Manning, middle daughter, family footnote, the name scribbled in pencil between Lauren's valedictorian trophies and my little brother's Travel League soccer medals. Back then our colonial house in Westport smelled of lemon polish and ambition. College pennants framed the hallway the way other homes displayed baby pictures. Mom would glide from room to room like a stage manager, rehearsing our futures under her breath. Yale for Lauren, Columbia for Adam, maybe Stanford for Claire if her math scores come up. Dad subscribed to 3 newspapers, Times, Journal, Financial Weekly, and arranged them each dawn so the mastheads formed a tidy staircase of influence. Over brioche toast he quizzed us on market indexes. I was 13 the morning I answered his Dow Jones question with the price of feed corn instead. He lowered the paper just enough for a puzzled frown, as though I'd answered in Morse code. After school I traded lacrosse practice for the only place that felt wide enough for my lungs, Old Man Duffy's microfarm on Saugatuck Road. Duffy raised a mismatched ark of rescue animals, but the pigs captured me entirely. I loved their frank curiosity, the way they rooted the earth as if searching for lost stories. Their skin held a warmth nothing in our spotless kitchen could match. On Saturdays, while Lauren rehearsed French verb conjugations, I mucked stalls and learned to distinguish acorns from barley with my eyes closed. At night I hid library books under my quilt, titles like Rotational Grazing and Soil Health, flashlight trembling while the house slept. Mom called it a phase. Kids collect rock bands or unicorns, she told her friends, sipping sparkling water on the deck. Claire collects mud. They laughed, the gentle laugh of parents certain the world would eventually correct their children. High school arrived with the roar of standardized tests. Guidance counselors spoke of branding ourselves for admissions. Lauren built a resume like a skyscraper, Model UN, rowing team, 2 summer internships. I volunteered at the farm's weekend stand, selling heritage breed pork chops alongside jars of honey we strained by hand. Customers lingered to ask about feed mixtures. I answered with sparkling detail, feeling taller than any skyscraper. On junior year career day, Dad coaxed me into a navy blazer and sat me opposite a tax attorney who extolled the virtues of billable hours. My ears rang until I could hear, as if from very far away, a sow's soft grunt and the clatter of piglets racing for breakfast. I thanked the attorney, returned the borrowed blazer to Mom's closet, and grabbed my barn coat instead. That evening, during a dinner of cedar plank salmon, I announced I wanted to raise heritage pigs for a living. Forks paused midair. Lauren's brows climbed. Mom's wineglass hovered inches from her lips. Dad blinked twice, then let out a single surprised laugh. "What would you call this enterprise?" he asked, voice light the way air feels before lightning. Lauren supplied the punchline, Pig Princess Incorporated. The table erupted in relief, the joke had rescued the moment. I laughed too, because laughter was easier than explaining a dream no one else could see. Senior year blurred, AP exams, prom fittings, acceptance envelopes. Yale waitlisted me, then admitted me late, proof, Mom said, that the universe rewards perseverance. I tried to care. I visited campus, felt my heart beat harder only when I passed the Sustainable AG Club student garden. Maybe, I told myself, I could study environmental policy and sneak into the farm lab on weekends. Maybe that would be enough. It wasn't. Freshman fall tasted like cafeteria kale and fluorescent fatigue. I watched lecture slides on economic models of efficiency and thought of how pigs composted whole fields into richer soil without any PowerPoint at all. Christmas break, I drove past Duffy's farm, snow creaked under the tires, and every fence post looked like a punctuation mark urging me to finish a sentence I'd been stalling on. Middle of spring term, I packed my dorm in a single afternoon. 2 flannel shirts, 3 paperbacks, a notebook darkened by rain, and the admissions packet I could not make myself throw away. I drafted an email to the registrar, "Thank you for the opportunity, but my plans have changed." Then I drove south, back to the House of Lemon Polish, to deliver news no spreadsheet could soften. Dinner that night was roast chicken and strained patience. Dad carved in decisive strokes. Mom laid napkins with surgical precision. I cleared my throat. I've withdrawn from Yale. I'm leasing 5 acres in Vermont. I'm starting a pasture-based pig farm. The words landed like hail on a tin roof. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then Dad set the carving knife down so gently the silver barely clicked. "You're joking," he said. "Not a question." "I'm not." Mom's lips parted, searching for a civilized objection. What emerged was softer, more brittle. "Claire, honey, you'll come crawling back once reality sets in." Lauren focused on the linen cloth, tracing its damask pattern, as though embarrassed for us all. "This is reality," I whispered. Dad's chair scraped. "You are throwing away a Manning legacy for manure." His voice rose, sharp enough to slice any reply. The chandelier swayed from his movement, light scattered across the china. I noticed a smear of gravy on my plate and thought absurdly that pigs would have licked it clean. "Legacy," I repeated, steady. "Mine starts in the dirt." Mom exhaled like a deflating balloon. "You'll see. Give it 6 months." I will, I said. And 6 years. Maybe 60. The silence that followed was deeper than disagreement. It was erasure, the clean white swipe of a chalkboard. Dinner ended with plates half-eaten, conversations quarter-grown, goodwill shattered like wishbones. Upstairs, I filled a duffel, work gloves, dog-eared notebooks, one pair of jeans without mud stains, kept for who knows what occasions. Lauren hovered in the doorway, arms folded tight. I don't get it, she admitted. You're smart. You could do anything. I am doing anything, I said, and touched her shoulder in farewell. At dawn I carried the duffel to my car. Frost feathered the windshield, but the sky in the east blushed pale rose, a promise of longer days. I opened the trunk, nestled a box of borrowed hand tools next to the books. Dad's office light flicked on upstairs, his shadow crossed the blinds but never paused at the window. Engine rumbling, I backed down the drive, past the hedges trimmed into obedient cubes, past the mailbox painted Yale blue. Tires met the main road, the speed limit sign pointed north like an arrow aimed at possibility. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I drove with boots, books, and silence for company. Each mile farther from Westport, the air smelled less of polish and more of pine. Somewhere after Hartford the first flake of snow swirled across the windshield, melting on impact, a silent salute. I tightened my grip on the wheel, heart thrumming with a new word that felt truer than any honor roll, beginning. And so I crossed into Vermont, chasing a future no one else had drafted for me, the road unfolding like unplowed field under winter sky. The trailer had no heat, but at least it was mine. In February 2017 that small aluminum box sat like a silver blister on 5 snow-capped acres outside Brattleboro, Vermont. The door stuck in cold weather, the faucet spit rust, and the wind slapped the walls hard enough to rattle the pans. Still, each dawn when I pulled on stiff barn boots and stepped into air that tasted metallic with frost, the land answered back with a hush I'd never known in Westport. Out here, silence was permission. The locals called me Pig Girl, half nickname, half obituary for a future they assumed I'd surrendered. At the feed store an old dairyman tapped his cap and said, "You the one with them rescue hogs?" I nodded. He sniffed almost kindly. "Pigs'll teach you humility quicker in a sermon." He was right. That first winter I learned humility by the quart. I'd taken in 7 Tamworth crosses from a bankrupt farm upstate. They arrived in a rattling stock trailer, ribs showing, hooves overgrown. I coaxed them down a makeshift ramp with bruised apples and spoke to them the way you talk to frightened children, steady, low, promising nothing but presence. The mud around their pen froze nightly, thawed by noon, and sucked at my boots until the laces frayed. Every shovel stroke felt like lifting the world by spoon. Yet the mud taught me more than any lecture hall ever did. Mud whispered that nutrient cycling wasn't theory but a duet of waste and time. Mud reminded me markets are fickle but topsoil endures. And mud made me laugh the day a neighbor's kid leaned over the fence and asked if Pig Girl ever planned to shower again. Honey, I thought, some perfumes cost a fortune to fake what this silt gives away for free. Spring arrived disguised as more mud, Vermonters call it a season, and they're not joking. I framed a shelter with salvaged barn boards, laid fresh straw that smelled of sun, and watched the pigs root for last year's acorns. Their snouts turned the soil like tillers, leaving behind divots that pooled rainwater. I planted clover in those pockets, betting on a greener July. Nights, I studied spreadsheets Gloria emailed, feed ratios, break-even points, until battery bars glowed red. When the generator failed I read by kerosene, pages trembling each time wind wrapped the trailer. Money was scarce, pride cheaper still. I bartered bacon ends for tractor repairs, maple-cured belly for seed potatoes. At the Saturday farmer's market, my table sat between heirloom tomatoes and herbal salves. Folks eyed the coolers, uncertain. One man asked if ethical pork was a political slogan, another whispered, "Looks fatty." I smiled, offered toothpick samples, told them fat was flavor and flavor was forgiveness for 1,000 bland dinners. Some bought out of curiosity, others out of pity. Either way, cash fed the pigs and the pigs repaid me in purpose. One rainy market day, a teenager filmed me with her phone while I sliced warm smoked ham. She liked the steam curling into March air. "Mind if I post?" she asked. I shrugged. That night, back at the trailer, I saw myself online, wind-blown, cheeks ruddy, laughing as I explained why pigs need pasture the way stories need listeners. Comments piled up, "This looks real. Where can we try it?" One said simply, "More please." So I gave them more. I borrowed Marcus's old DSLR, yes, the same Marcus who would later polish wine lists in Boston, and balanced it on hay bales to film dawn chores. Viewers watched me carry buckets that steamed in -10 air, saw piglets race after my coat tails, heard the crunch of frozen ground soften under morning sun. I edited at the public library, teaching myself cuts and fades while snowmelt dripped from my boots onto the carpet. When I posted a 5-minute clip titled "Respect the Animal, Taste the Difference," I expected maybe a few hundred curious strangers. It hit 2 million views in 3 days. On day 1 I refreshed the page until the library computer froze. Day 2, a regional food blog emailed, requesting an interview. By day 3, my data plan exploded with notifications. Amid the digital roar came a subject line so crisp it felt unreal: investment inquiry, Boston group interested in farm-to-table concept. I read the email twice, then a third time out loud, to the pigs, to the trailer walls, to the Vermont dusk. The screen lit my hands, trembling with equal parts terror and wonder. For a moment the only sound was a sow's low grunt outside, reminding me the trough still needed topping. Opportunity is a door, but chores are hinges. Without the mundane, nothing opens. I slid the phone into my pocket, grabbed feed, and stepped into twilight. Fireflies hadn't yet returned, but the horizon glowed lavender behind bare maples. The pigs greeted me with contented snorts, no different than yesterday. Unaware numbers on a screen might shift the shape of our world. As I poured grain, I thought of Dad's polished table and Mom's thin smile. "You'll come crawling back." Perhaps I would return someday, but not crawling, and not for approval. A wind rustled the tarp above the shelter, carrying the faintest scent of distant lilac. I realized spring had come again, quietly confident, exactly on schedule. The land keeps its promises even when people don't. I scratched the broad head of my eldest guilt and listened to her huff in pleasure. "We're not done," I whispered. "We're barely beginning." Back inside, the trailer groaned against a rising breeze. I wiped mud from the doorway, sat at the rickety table, and reopened the email. 3 simple lines, an invitation to pitch, a compliment on my values, a date 2 weeks out. I exhaled, steadying my breath the way you steady a skittish piglet, slow, sure, kind. Then, with calloused fingers, I typed yes. Because sometimes the road turns to rutted sludge and sometimes it meets fresh pavement, but either way you drive forward if you want the view to change. When I hit send, a new ping punctured the quiet. Another email, same subject line, different sender, Boston address. Opportunity tends to travel in pairs. My heart kicked once against bone, equal parts alarm clock and anthem. I stared a moment longer at the glowing inbox, at the promise wedged between spam and feed invoices, and thought, so this is what risk smells like: wood smoke, wet hay, and the faintest hint of hope. "We love your vision," the tallest investor said, brushing dust from his city loafers. Could you host a dinner for us, here on the farm? I looked past him to the barn, its weather-gray boards yawning in late summer sun. Hay dust spiraled in warm air, pigs snored under shade trees, content as retirees on porch swings. A dinner here, among squeaky gates and cricket song? My pulse kicked. But I heard myself reply evenly, 6 courses, next Saturday. Sunset seating, rain or shine. All week I stitched a dining room from borrowed things and borrowed faith. Amos, the neighboring beekeeper, loaned me 12 maple slab tables. My friend Jenna raided yard sales for chairs, spindlebacks, metal cafe stools, a pink plastic booster that squeaked like a clarinet when you sat. We strung thrift store Christmas lights between rafters, their warm glow crushed every wrinkle of doubt after dusk. A barn smells honest, straw, wood smoke, earth, and honesty was the only brand I had. Menu planning felt like conversation rather than advertisement. I walked the garden rows at dawn, touching tomato vines still cool with dew, sniffed basil that released peppery clouds when bruised. Pigs rooted nearby, turning soil and secrets. By noon I'd scrawled a lineup on butcher paper. Crisp pork jowl with pickled green strawberries. Smoked shoulder consommé poured at the table over sweet corn kernels. Bellying bacon flatbread, charred onions, wild thyme. Pasture chop with apple cider glaze, served rare enough to taste the orchard. Slow-roasted ribs, maple heat, collared slaw. Salted lard caramels, because sweetness needs backbone. No printed logos, no intention of hiding the fat marbling, the fat was the story. Gloria Sandoval arrived the eve before the dinner. I knew her only by reputation, daughter of Mexican immigrants, founder of a regional bakery chain, self-made twice after one bankruptcy. She stepped from her truck in scuffed boots, hair tied high, eyes bright as if morning traveled with her. "I'm here to observe," she said, pressing calloused palms together. "Do what you do, I'll keep quiet." Still, her presence loosened a hidden knot in my chest. Successful people who listen are rarer than heritage hogs. Saturday dropped a honey-gold light over the pasture. I'd borrowed linen from the church hall, it didn't match but smelled of lavender starch. At 5 o'clock, sedans and shiny neutrals rolled up the gravel lane. 3 investors emerged, blinking against the sun, 2 men in crisp chinos and a woman in a linen jumpsuit. They carried questions in leather folios, but I handed them mason jar cocktails first, bourbon, pear shrub, a single mint leaf. Good decisions start with softened edges. Dinner unfolded like a field hymn. I plated pork jowl on wooden boards, the meat crackling beneath a sheen of cider vinegar. Conversation hesitated, then found its footing in the flavors. By course 3, laughter leapt the table like sparks. They asked how a college dropout learned consommé. I said pigs are patient teachers if you pay attention. Gloria watched, smiling behind a cider bottle, noting every detail while pretending to be invisible. Between courses the barn swayed with cicada drone. Candle flames jittered when pigs snuffled near the doorway, curious about applause. I didn't shoo them away, the investors needed to see where their dinner started. For the main course I carved chops thick as paperback novels, edges seared mahogany. One investor cut in, eyes widening at the blush of real pasture pork. He chewed, swallowed, laid down knife and fork. "You can taste the place," he said softly, as if startled by his own honesty. We finished under string lights humming with summer moths. I passed brown bags of lard caramels like party favors. The investors pocketed them with the delight of kids sneaking candy after bedtime. Someone mentioned spreadsheets, someone else waved it off. In that barn the numbers could wait. Morning smelled of wet ash and overturned plates. Birds stitched gossip into the maple leaves as I swept straw from beneath the tables. The investors returned wearing yesterday's excitement, their suits stayed behind in hotel closets. We sat on milk crates by the fire pit, steam rising from enamel mugs of camp coffee. "We're in," said the tall man. The linen jumpsuit woman slid a pre-drafted term sheet across a cutting board. They spoke of seed rounds and scalable narratives, but their eyes tracked the pigs wandering the dewy field, hoof prints writing soft calligraphy in new grass. They wanted to invest not just in pork, but in the quiet conviction wrapping this place like mist. I skimmed the numbers. Fair. Clean. No hidden hooks. My thumbprint stained the paper with a faint coffee ring. I thought of Dad's dining room negotiations, all cutlery and conquest. This felt different, like planting seedlings rather than staking claims. We shook hands. They drove away, leaving tire tracks that curved toward pavement and, eventually, cities humming with fluorescent ambition. My ambition smelled instead of loam and wood smoke, but today the 2 cents found common ground. Gloria hadn't joined the meeting. I found her in the garden kneeling to inspect tomato vines, nails tracing the fuzz on green fruit. She rose, dusting her jeans. "So," she asked. "They signed." She nodded once, unsurprised. A breeze lifted her braid, sunrise glinted off a thin copper bracelet on her wrist. "I stayed behind," she said, voice low, "because I don't just want to finance dinners. I build systems, supply chains, teams, stays up when we're tired kind of systems." I studied her face, weather creased at the corners, eyes clear with the kind of optimism earned in the minds of failure. She extended a hand. "Let's build something together." My fingers closed around hers, firm as fence wire, and the barn lights flicked off in the growing day as if agreeing, dawn belongs to those willing to shape it. We gutted an old feed store, and I called it the Honest Table. The plank floorboards still smelled faintly of corn dust the day our crew pried them up, revealing a scatter of lost nails and ticket stubs from livestock auctions long gone. I kept one stub, faded blue ink, lot 42, pinned above my desk as a reminder. Everything good starts humble. Let the food speak, Gloria always reminded me. So while demolition roared, I drafted menus in the quiet before dawn, pork tranche laced with garden thyme, shoulder braised overnight until the marrow whispered across the tongue, lard fried apple hand pies wrapped in butcher paper like love notes. Nothing precious, nothing hidden, just ingredients laid bare. The building sat on the edge of Boston's South End, wedged between a microbrewery and a shuttered hardware store. Property agents called the street up and coming, which meant rent we could barely stomach and foot traffic we couldn't yet count. But the brick shell offered high windows for winter sun and, inside, enough ceiling height to suspend a chandelier made from reclaimed stable rings. It felt like possibility disguised as rubble. Marcus Reed arrived in a navy suit the first morning of renovation, clipboard in hand, glasses fogging from drywall dust. "General manager," he introduced himself, though Gloria had already vouched for his finesse with both spreadsheets and seating charts. I liked him immediately. He greeted the demolition crew by name after glancing once at their jackets. Miranda Cho joined a week later, hair twisted into a practical knot, sleeves already smudged with flour. She ran fingertips along the exposed brick, listened to the echo, and said, "Good acoustics for a sizzling skillet." When a chef speaks in sounds, hire her. By lunchtime she'd sketched a prep line layout on butcher paper and scribbled a note beside the dish pit, "No shortcuts. Ever." Construction blurred into muscle memory, sand, sweep, paint, repeat. Gloria managed budgets like a conductor cues violins, turning my tendency toward overspending on handcrafted sconces into donations from local artisans eager to barter for future reservations. At night she and I sat on upturned buckets, sharing thermoses of bean stew, discussing plate costs versus staff culture. "People invest in values," she said. "Keep yours loud." I kept them loud by staying quiet in the press. We declined every profile that asked for headshots, offered instead pasture photos, pigs rooting under maple leaves, hands turning soil. Reporters pushed, "Who's the woman behind the farm?" Marcus answered politely, "Our founder prefers the story remain on the plate." Some called it mysterious branding, I called it breathing room. Opening week, September 2021, arrived smelling of fresh varnish and smoked hickory. We seated 42 guests the first night, neighbors, farmers, a few curious food bloggers who'd driven up from Providence. Miranda's crew moved like choreography, pans hissed, plates gleamed, voices stayed low. I floated between kitchen pass and dining room, denim apron speckled with crackling salt, listening to forks pause after first bites. Those pauses were applause you could feel in your ribs. Word traveled faster than cider ferments. By December, a chalkboard out front warned, "Tonight's wait list, 90 minutes. Bring a book or good company." People did, bundled in coats, sipping thermoses of complimentary hot broth we ladled through the door every half hour. I still mucked stalls in Vermont each dawn, left at 4, headlights tunneling through black trees, radio whispering frost warnings. The pigs grunted hello, indifferent to city hype. Their steadiness kept mine. One January afternoon a letter arrived stamped with the New York Times dining. Marcus held it between thumb and forefinger like a live ember. I read it leaning against a sack of feed in the storage nook. A critic's visit was complete, review pending publication. Miranda exhaled as though she'd been holding winter in her lungs. We did not speak of stars or rankings, we spoke of keeping the pork chop honest, the broth clear, the staff rested. The review landed 3 Tuesdays later. I was in Vermont mending fence wire when my phone rattled with Gloria's call. She didn't speak at first, just let me hear the kitchen erupt in cheers. Then, steadying her voice, she read aloud, "If truth were edible, it might taste like Claire Manning's pork, deep, unpretentious, impossible to forget. Boston has its share of farm-to-table facades, but the honest table lives up to its name. Meet, if you can, the Pig Lady of America." Pig Lady of America. I laughed so hard a gilt trotted over, concerned. Titles never suited me, but this one felt like a pair of well-worn gloves, perhaps because it honored the animals before the accolades. Marcus framed the article for the foyer. I let him, though I asked he keep my face out of the frame. Recognition multiplied armies of reservation emails. Marcus implemented a lottery system. Gloria fielded calls from investors wanting to franchise before the paint dried. We said no, and no again, until someone asked why. "Because growth is only good if the soul grows with it," Gloria answered. Simple math, expansion minus purpose equals emptiness. Late one snowy night, Miranda and I closed the kitchen together. Steam curled from the dish sink, the staff already gone, the dining room lights dimmed to embers. She wiped her hands on a towel, looked around the quiet space, and said, "You realize we built a place where strangers taste your childhood and call it dinner." I thought about that. "Maybe," I said, "they're tasting their own childhood, too. Salt has a way of unlocking memory." We stepped outside. Snow muffled the city into gentle hush. Streetlights painted halos on the sidewalk, and for a breath the world felt small enough to cradle. I remembered a line my grandmother once murmured over quilting, "A full heart doesn't brag, it hums." The restaurant behind us was humming. We locked the door, and I checked my phone out of habit. A new email rested atop the pile. Subject, dinner reservation confirmed, Lauren Manning. Party, 7. Date, December 23, 7:30 p.m. Location, the Honest Table, Flagship. Cold crept through my gloves, settling in my palms like snow that refused to melt. I stared at the screen until Miranda asked, "Everything okay?" I slipped the phone back into my pocket and smiled, feeling something shift beneath the quiet. "Just family, making plans," I said. Inside, the dining room lights shut off one by one, reflections fading from the windows, as if the building itself were taking a measured breath before company arrived. "You owe Mom at least that much." That single sentence sat in my inbox like a stone, anchoring every airy excuse I had rehearsed for bowing out. The reservation confirmation from Lauren was attached below, 7 seats, December 23rd, 7:30 p.m., followed by a row of celebratory emojis as if we were all simply planning a surprise party. 5 weeks on the wait list for a table she could have secured with one phone call to me, and still she hadn't wondered why her request sailed through. Either she knew, or she didn't dare guess. I shut my laptop and let the quiet of the farmhouse expand. Outside, early winter wind rattled the porch rafters. Inside, the wood stove popped and sighed, perfuming the room with applewood smoke. The pigs had settled hours ago, their low breathing rising through floorboards like a distant sea. I imagined Mom rehearsing polite disapproval, Dad practicing small talk he'd wield like a butter knife, and Lauren smoothing a napkin over anxiety she'd never name out loud. The thought made my chest tighten, but something steadier moved beneath the nerves, a pulse of defiance, yes, but also of certainty. This land, this life, had already proven their predictions wrong. Showing up might be the last card to play, but it was mine to deal. At dawn I mucked stalls with deliberate slowness, letting cold air bite my cheeks awake. Frost jeweled every straw edge, catching sunrise in dusty pink shards. The sight steadied me the way prayer must steady other people. I fed the herd, lingering to scratch behind one gilt's ear until she collapsed in blissful surrender. Pigs accept you wholly or not at all, there's no middle ground, no social script. On the drive to Boston the sky turned pewter, then silver, then gave up daylight altogether, releasing a hush of snow that ticked against the windshield like typewriter keys. I rehearsed an old habit: if conversation falters, ask about wine. Then I let it go. Tonight, silence would be eloquent enough. Miranda met me in the prep kitchen, flour streaking her cheek like war paint. "Front of house has questions about the VIP list," she said, eyes sharp behind steam curling off a stock pot. "They can't decide whether to treat your family like dignitaries or diners who forgot their manners." "Diners," I answered. "Hungry ones." She nodded, pulled a sheet tray of cider-glazed crackling from the oven, and slid it toward me. "Taste. Tell me if the salt's high enough to make a point." I bit into the shard, it snapped like thin ice, melting into sweet heat. "Perfect," I said, licking my thumb. "Make sure table 7 gets the bigger pieces." Marcus appeared in the doorway, Ty already nodded, calm as ever. "Chef, your party of 7 reconfirmed. Shall we seat them at the banquet or center round?" "Center," I said, picturing Dad surveying the room from a throne he hadn't earned. "And Marcus?" "I'll seat you last." He offered the faintest smile, the one that acknowledged every chapter of the story without cracking the spine in public. Back upstairs, I changed in the small office we called a locker room. Denim dress, pressed but unpretentious, corduroy jacket with one corner chewed by a curious piglet, and boots, scrubbed clean yet still faintly scented of hay. I brushed sawdust from my braid. Perfume felt dishonest, so I dabbed a whisper of cedar oil behind each ear, the forest's own cologne. My phone buzzed. "Lauren. Traffic slow, be there soon." Exclamation point optimism, as though our history could be smoothed like a wrinkle under a hot iron. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the screen and slipped it into the desk drawer beside a stack of seed catalogs. Seeds, like words, grew only when the season was right. Snow thickened outside, flakes swirling past the high windows. The dining room glowed amber under Edison bulbs strung between reclaimed beams. Staff glided through final checks, tableware aligned, water glasses filled exactly 2 fingers below the rim. No PR banners, no owner's portrait. Just plates waiting for stories to land. I wandered to the herb wall by the bar, pinched a sprig of rosemary, and rolled it between my palms until its resin cut through the scent of polish and linen. Gloria said the place hummed because we'd woven the farm into every board and nail. Tonight, that hum felt like a heartbeat. At 7:26 Marcus signaled me from the host stand. My family had arrived. Through the service corridor's narrow gap I saw them shake snow from their coats. Dad in a charcoal blazer, scanning the room with practiced appraisal, Mom adjusting her pearl necklace, the same gesture she'd made the night I left Yale, Lauren in winter white, cheeks flushed from cold and nerves, Trevor hovering, his smile already apologetic. They looked smaller than I remembered, framed against the vaulted brick walls. I waited until appetizers left the pass, house pickles, lardo toasts, tiny cups of consommé, each dish a breadcrumb on the trail to recognition. Then, at 7:42, Marcus dipped his head, time. I stepped onto the polished floorboards, boots thudding a gentle warning. Conversations rose and fell around me, diners oblivious to the small drama unfolding center stage. Halfway to the table Dad saw me. His expression flickered, surprise? Relief, before settling into the mask of dry humor he wielded like a compass. You really think you belong here? He called, echoing an old refrain loud enough for nearby tables to glance up. I'm punctual, I said, sliding into the last empty chair. Thought that counted for something. Mom inhaled, prepping a critique of my jacket, but Lauren spoke first, voice tight. We didn't think you'd come. I steadied my water glass. 5-week wait list. Would have been a shame to waste the spot. Trevor chuckled too quickly, then subsided when Lauren nudged him. Dad speared a crostini, lifted it, sniffed. Smells robust. That's the rosemary, I offered. And thyme. He didn't catch the double meaning. Marcus approached to pour wine, eyes meeting mine for a breath longer than etiquette required, an unspoken ready? I answered with the slightest nod. The table stilled. Marcus pivoted toward Dad. Sir, may I interest you in our charcuterie notes? They pair nicely with the pork roulade this evening. Dad arched a brow. Pork, Hope it isn't too rustic. Behind the swing door, I knew, Miranda was slicing roulade glazed with juniper, meat from the very sow whose piglets once chewed this jacket's corduroy hem. The smell would reach the table in minutes, carrying every mile of my journey on a plume of smoke. Snow tapped the windows, small hands asking to be let in. I leaned back, letting the chair's wooden slats frame my spine, and smiled, not to soothe them, not to provoke, but because the moment fit like a well-worn glove. For years I'd imagined this dinner as a trial, a final exam. Now it felt more like a harvest, seeds planted in mud, grown in quiet, offered without apology. Is there a Miss Claire Manning at this table? Marcus's voice cut through clinks of glass and low jazz, calm but carrying like a chapel bell. 7 forks paused midair. Dad's fork hovered over roulade, Mom's knife held a smear of herb butter. Lauren lowered her wine, crimson warbling against crystal. Trevor glanced around as if expecting cameras. I felt every diner within 3 tables lean inward, curiosity rippling across linen like wind on wheat. Marcus held a small leather folder, the investor wine list, embossed with the Iron Pig emblem. He stood square, shoulders easy, precisely the posture we practiced when greeting venture capitalists. My name sounded strange issued from his mouth in front of these particular witnesses, but his eyes told me, ready when you are. I had spent the last 50 minutes letting my family dismantle each course with the tidy cruelty of people raiding hotels. Dad declared the consommé too agricultural. Mom dabbed crackling crumbs from her lips, whispering that the plating lacked refinement. Lauren, emboldened by her fiancé's polite silence, leaned forward after the flatbread and asked, half teasing, "Do you still smell the barn every morning, Claire?" I thought I caught a hint of, well, you know. The table chuckled. I folded my napkin, smoothed its edge, and asked Marcus for more water. Now Marcus waited for my cue. I took one breath, juniper smoke, rosemary, heated brass, and said, "This table is perfect, Marcus." "Thank you." My voice carried farther than I intended. Two nearby couples blinked, as though realizing the performance was larger than they'd paid for. Marcus nodded. "Very good, Miss Manning." He laid the wine list beside my plate, recited a soft "enjoy your evening," and withdrew. Dad set down his fork. "Your usual table? What's he talking about?" His tone feigned amusement, but the edge of unease glinted through. Across the room the kitchen door swung, releasing the scent of seared loin and apple glaze, my scent, honest and unmistakable. I watched it reach them. Mom's nostrils flared, Lauren's brows knit. Recognition is slow when pride stands in the way. "It's a mistake," Mom said, turning the page of the menu as if it might offer clarification. "They must think you're someone else." Trevor finally ventured, "Maybe she dines here often?" A lifeline tossed without conviction. "Let's finish dinner," I suggested, voice even. The next course should arrive soon. It did, thick chops, bone-in, caramelized edges glistening amber. Two servers swept in, arranging plates like synchronized dancers. Dad cut first, juices pooled golden pink. He chewed, surprise softening his brow. "Remarkable," he murmured. Then louder, for table and neighbors alike, "Best pork I've tasted since, well, ever." Mom tasted, eyes widening before she could school them. Lauren forked a bite, then paused as if memory tugged her sleeve. "This flavor," she said quietly. "It reminds me of that video. The farm girl on YouTube, the one who went viral." I swallowed a smile. Small world. Marcus reappeared, pouring wine. "Chef sends her compliments," he said, eyes flicking to me. "She'd welcome feedback from Miss Manning when convenient." Dad bristled. "Enough riddles. Claire, do you know the chef?" "I do." I set my fork down, let my palms rest on the table's reclaimed pine. "Intimately." Silence settled like new snow, everything familiar, yet altered. I could have savored the hush, let it stretch, but clarity felt kinder. I straightened. "Dad, Mom, Lauren, Trevor, everyone, there's something you should understand before dessert." All four faces tipped toward me, curiosity giving way to apprehension. Around us, conversations dimmed, the dining room sensed weather shifting. "I own this restaurant," I said, steady as a held note. "I built every course you're eating, raised it, cured it, cooked it, believed in it when no one else would." Words landed with the audible weight of stones dropped into still water. Dad's jaw worked without sound. Mom blinked, pearls rising and falling with each tight breath. Trevor's mouth formed a small O, eyes darting to the ceiling as though answers might hang from rafters. Lauren stared hardest, her flush climbing from collarbone to hairline. She looked 20 again, caught copying homework, and I felt a brief ache for the sisters we'd never quite been. Finally Dad found voice. "You can't be serious." His laugh, brittle, tried to shatter the truth like thin glass, but truth is thicker, forged in cast-iron skillets and frostbit mornings. Marcus approached, sensing the beat. "Is everything satisfactory, Mr. Manning?" he asked, politeness sharpened by perfect timing. Dad looked up, torn between indignation and sudden caution. You knew? From our opening night, sir, Marcus said, then addressed the whole table. Miss Manning created the honest table. She oversees every location in the group. A murmur rose from neighboring diners, phones tilted for clandestine photos. I kept my gaze on my family, offering them my calm the way you offer a hand to a spooked animal. I wanted tonight to be about the food, I said, not about proving a point. But honesty belongs everywhere, including dinner. Mom pressed napkin to lips, eyes shimmering. Why didn't you tell us, she whispered. Because I needed to know who I was without your applause. My voice stayed gentle. Years in the barn had taught me shouting frightens more than it persuades. And I needed you to taste the work before judging the worker. Lauren's wineglass trembled, she set it down fast, a tiny chime escaping. All those jokes, she whispered. I didn't. I never thought. You didn't ask to know, I said, without heat. Until now. Silence again, but this time it felt like soil after rain, heavy, promising. I heard plates clink in the kitchen and the soft saxophone slide of the band in the corner, life moving forward because it always does. Dad opened his mouth, words gathering, but the first sentence stuck. And that was enough. I had brought the story full circle, whether they read the last page was theirs to decide. I leaned back, breathing cedar and citrus notes from the glass Marcus poured. The lights above shimmered in my water, the same way stars once shimmered in puddles outside my trailer. Different roof, same sky. Around us the dining room resumed its hum, but a hush lingered at our table, fragile as the moment before dawn. Dad cleared his throat, preparing a second attempt at disbelief, yet I no longer feared his verdict. Whatever he said next would land on ground I'd already tilled. So what, assistant manager? Sous chef? Dad's spoon clinked the plate as he grasped for category, for any rung on a ladder that would put me beneath him again. His voice tried for lightness, but the syllables wobbled like a table with one short leg. I met his gaze over the candle, a wick now burned low enough that its light softened our faces, erasing a decade of careful posturing. Neither, I said. I'm the woman signing paychecks and peeling potatoes, depending on the hour. Mom lowered her water glass, pearls catching lamplight. Claire, please. We're just surprised. Surely there were milestones, articles, awards, when you could have reached out. I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing, I answered, words even as a level beam. Around us the dining room shifted into evening hush, conversations mellowed, plates gentled onto linen, jazz slowed to a murmur like rain behind closed doors. Marcus appeared with fresh rye rolls and a small crock of whipped lard. He set them down quietly, offered me a questioning look, I nodded, he retreated. The room swallowed him the way night folds around a single firefly, barely noticed unless you search for it. Dad tried again. You make it sound as if we drove you away. I laid my hand flat on the table. No, you drove your expectations beside me in the passenger seat and told me to pick a destination you'd pre-approve. When I chose another road, you simply refused to ride along. Lauren shifted, worry creasing her forehead. But dropping out, Mom thought you were having some sort of crisis. I stacked a crumb between finger and thumb, watching it crumble. I was in crisis, one that required dirt, cold mornings, and a trailer with no heat. 3 part-time jobs kept that trailer from tipping over, pouring lattes at dawn, scrubbing motel bathrooms at noon, bartending under a flickering moosehead sign at night. The pigs ate before I did, because feed doesn't wait politely. Trevor blinked. You worked in a bar? Pool tables, neon lights, Wednesday karaoke. I learned to defuse drunk arguments with exactly the tone I'm using now. Mom touched her napkin, smoothing a fold for the third time. We would have helped, financially, at least. But help wasn't the currency I needed, I said, voice soft. Respect was. Miranda emerged to clear entree plates, her chef whites dotted with apple cider glaze. She thanked each diner, then paused at me. Kitchen's ready for feedback when you are, chef. A subtle acknowledgement, nothing showy, just the gentle wave of a flag signaling whose house we were in. Dad watched her leave, lines deepening between his brows. Chef calls you chef, he muttered, half incredulous. Because she earned the title, I replied. And because I spelled her name right on her first paycheck. Small gestures travel far. Lauren exhaled, eyes glistening. I teased you, she whispered. Pig princess. I didn't know how serious you were. I was serious the way seasons are serious, I said. They come whether you believe in them or not. Mom's shoulders sagged, pearls settling into the soft hollow of her collarbone. All those Christmases, she said. Do you know how strange it felt cooking ham without you home to taste if it was overbrined? I swallowed. Stranger still boiling instant noodles in a trailer on the 25th because I'd sold every marketable cut and kept only bones for broth. A hush drifted over the table, heavy as snowfall. Even the neighboring diners seemed to sense a page turning, their conversations dimmed to rustles. Dad cleared his throat. So you're proud of this? Proud of denying yourself comforts just to prove a point? Proud, I repeated, tasting the word, that I built it without bending into someone you'd finally accept. Because if I'd reshaped myself for your nod, the nod would own me. I felt heat behind my ribs, not anger, but the warming coil of long-guarded truth finally stretched. Mom's eyes shimmered. We never meant acceptance to feel conditional. It felt conditional because it was, I said gently. Grades, colleges, resumes, lovely if they fit, suffocating if they don't. Love is soil, not a trophy case. Dad looked away first, toward the bar where a server polished glassware under pendant lights. His reflection blurred in the curved bottles. When he spoke, his voice bore the fatigue of a man cataloging shortfalls even he never dared admit. I was afraid, he said, barely above a whisper, that you'd fail so far from home we couldn't rescue you. I did fail, I answered. Often. But I also learned that failing while holding my own map is a kind of freedom. Lauren dabbed at her eyes. So what now? She asked, tone wobbling between fear and hope. You cut us off forever? I leaned back, letting the chair cradle a spine that had hefted feed sacks before dawn. I studied each face, Dad's tight jaw, Mom's trembling hands, Lauren's tentative tilt forward, Trevor's stunned silence. And I realized the anger I'd carried was a bridge I'd already crossed, burning it now would only scorch new ground. Snow drifted outside the tall windows, flakes catching in street lamps like scattered salt. The scent of rosemary still ribboned through the air, mingling with the vanilla of soon-to-come desserts. In that mingled aroma lay choice, bitter or sweet, winter or hearth. I drew a slow breath. Words floated, unformed, somewhere between forgiveness and self-preservation. But the chapter of rage had finished, the chapter of terms, perhaps, was ready to begin. No more pig jokes. No investment offers. No family PR games. The words left my mouth one beat before the server whisked away the last dessert plate, strawberry compote still streaking white porcelain like a sunset we'd eaten too quickly. The table stilled, silver flickered beneath the pendant lights as forks froze midair. My family's faces rearranged in real time, surprise first, then caution, then something quieter I hadn't seen in years, consideration. Outside, snow settled into the seams of the street, softening the city's edges. Inside, the honest table exhaled the low hush of end of service, clinking glasses from the bar, Miranda's laugh echoing faintly from the kitchen, Marcus's measured footsteps as he closed the books. But at our table the air felt newly cleared, as though someone had opened a window despite the cold. Dad attempted a smile. "You make it sound like we're a marketing firm." I tucked a loose hair behind my ear. My life stopped being a potential pitch deck the day I chose mud over mahogany. "If we reconnect, it'll be on my terms." I let the sentence rest, unembellished, steady as a fence post. Mom folded her napkin carefully, smoothing each crease as though order on linen could impose order on uncertainty. "Claire, honey, we never meant." I raised a hand, gentle but firm. Intentions matter, but impacts linger longer. I'm willing to start fresh, but only if we retire the old script. Lauren's fingertips brushed the edge of her empty plate. "What script?" "The one where you're the superstar, I'm the cautionary tale, and family gatherings are press junkets for Dad's colleagues." I felt no sting in stating it. Years of blunt shovel work had stripped language of ornament. Trevor cleared his throat. "What about support?" "If you ever needed." I needed it. I met his eyes, not unkindly. "I just learned to supply it myself." He swallowed, nodded. A server appeared with a tray of steaming mugs. "Compliments of the chef," she said, placing hot cider studded with orange peel in front of each of us. The aroma curled upward, warm and forgiving. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into knuckles stiff from early morning chores. Dad lifted his cider but didn't drink. "You've built something remarkable, Claire. Surely you can understand why we'd want to celebrate it." "Celebrate, yes. Claim, no." I sipped, sweetness anchoring the words. There's a difference between sharing pride and using it as currency. Silence lapped the table's edges. Somewhere near the coat rack a diner laughed, high and bright, then faded into the clatter of dishes. The world kept turning. The stakes in our small orbit felt both monumental and ordinary, like deciding whether to let a storm keep you indoors or step out and feel the rain. I set my mug down. "I do have an olive branch, one with conditions." Lauren's head snapped up, hope flaring. "Your rehearsal dinner," I continued. "I'll host it here." "My gift." "But only if everyone agrees to the rules I just named." I looked at Dad, then Mom, then Lauren. "Here, you're guests, not stakeholders." Lauren's eyes widened. "You'd really do that?" "You're still my sister," I said, calm but unyielding. "But I'm not here to prove myself. Just to be myself." The weight of the statement drew a hush deeper than any previous pause. Mom's pearls glimmered as she inhaled, exhaled, a rhythm I knew from childhood, gathering composure. She reached for her mug, hands trembling slightly, and took a sip. When she set it down, moisture rimmed her lashes. "I can agree," she said, voice small but steady. "No more conditional love." Dad stared at the grain of the wooden table, fingers drumming once, twice, before stilling. His shoulders slumped, the slightest concession, but he didn't speak. The silence was its own confession. Trevor ventured a tentative smile, relief softening his features. "I think that sounds wonderful." Lauren pressed her napkin to her mouth, nodding quickly. "Yes. Yes, please." A bloom of warmth unfurled in my chest, tempered by caution. "Seeds sprout fragile first." I glanced toward the kitchen pass. Miranda stood there, wiping her hands on a towel, watching. She lifted 2 fingers in a small salute, as if to say, "Boundary set, game on." I answered with a subtle nod. Marcus appeared one last time with the bill already settled. He addressed the table but spoke to me through subtext. "We're honored you could dine with us tonight. Chef sends her regards." He placed embossed takeaway boxes before each family member, lard caramels, the taste of perseverance wrapped in wax paper, and retreated. Mom traced the restaurant's logo on the box, a tiny iron pig, head held high. "Your father used to tell a story about pigs never looking up at the sky," she murmured. "I suppose you proved even pigs, and daughters, do, when given space." "Space," I echoed, thinking of the Vermont fields under stars so bright they'd swallowed my doubts. "That's the first ingredient of honesty." Snow hissed against the windows as wind picked up, flakes swirling like confetti from an invisible celebration. Dad finally lifted his cider, took a slow sip, eyes distant. When he set the mug down, his gaze fell, not on me, but on his own hands, soft palms that never knew blisters from frozen buckets. For the first time, he looked down instead of across, as though searching the tabletop for missing pieces only he could supply. Mom's eyes glistened, reflecting candlelight and something older, maybe regret, maybe budding relief. She reached across the table toward Lauren, fingers brushing her daughter's wrist, and Lauren let them rest there, a small bridge over turbulent water. I watched my father look down at his own hands, and for the first time I didn't feel small, I just felt steady. Maybe some families never say "I'm sorry" the way you hope, but they show up in clumsy, human ways, like sipping cider in silence, or asking if they can come back again. In life, it's not about proving you were right, it's about choosing peace when you've earned the power to walk away. If this story speaks to something in your own heart, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts or memories. Sometimes, healing begins simply by being heard.